Alright, let's review the plan structure filter that was built in the first part of the tutorial. So we basically have a class that contains a reference to the patient, the current patient in Eclipse. Then we have a string variable that holds the structure ID. And what this was for was that we wanted to input a structure ID and then find all of the plans for that patient that reference the structure set containing a structure with this structure ID. Then we'd save all of those plans into a variable called matching plans. Let's see, where is matching plans? Right here. So it's a list of plan setups. And we did that by filtering out all the ones that didn't contain a reference to a structure set that referenced that structure ID. Then we also found all the mean doses for each plan. So we would take the plan and then we'd find if it referenced that structure set, then we would find the mean dose for that structure and store that in a separate list. So we have two lists. We have matching plans and mean doses. Then we have these two private variables, patient and structure ID. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to build a user interface for this class. We're going to use this as the view model for our view. Now, if you'll remember, this is the entry point for an ESAPI app. So if it's going to run through Eclipse, you're going to get a file that looks like this. It's going to have a blank script method. Don't worry about that. Don't touch that. And then you're going to have, I'm sorry, this is a constructor. Then you're going to have an execute method, and there's actually two of these. One of them is hidden because this variable is taken out. In the first part of the tutorial, we didn't use the window, but in this one, we are going to use the window. So let's go ahead and uncomment this window. And what we're going to do is we're going to inject our user interface into this window. This window is a container that Eclipse gives you to be able to fill with your user interface. Okay, so we just need to make a user interface to shoot into this window. So the way you do that is you right-click your project and you say Add User Control. And I'm just going to call my user control UI.xaml. Now XAML is an object type that's made with the XAML language, which is an XML language that describes .NET classes. So I'm just going to open this up. We'll have a look at it real quick. And you can see by default it just has a 300 by 300 square. The design height and design width, those are just for designing. If you actually ran this code, because it doesn't have anything in it, it would be 0 size. So by default, the user control will just have a grid structure. A grid is a layout element that helps position different elements on the canvas. And this is what it looks like. It's completely blank. So what we can do real quickly just to show how this works is we're going to add a simple button. And I'll put some, there's no text property here. It's called content. And because buttons can have pictures also. So I'm just going to finish that out. And look what happens. The button by default will fill all of the space. Okay, so that's kind of how this stuff works. It takes it's a little trial and error to kind of figure out what elements that will happen in. But this is the default element of, or the default behavior of an element inside of a grid. Now, we didn't have to just type out button. What we also could do is if you go up to View, Toolbox, you can see all of the different elements that you have access to. These are all the tools you have for building your user interface. So instead we could just drag over a button, and this time Visual Studio took some guesses on what you were trying to do. You can see all these properties of the button that have been put in here. So by default it has a height of 23 and you know, it's got some weird margins here, and I personally don't like to build a user interface like this because you can get some really wonky results when you actually render this out. It's best to keep it as simple as you can And so that's what I did here with the code version of it. And we'll figure out a different way to control how this button is rendered. Now let's hop on back to our entry point, and let's go ahead and do some things here. I'll do some cool stuff is what I put in there. First of all, let's instantiate a new instance of the plan structure filter. And I remember that takes a patient object and stores it locally. So you can always, if there's a red outline here, you can always click it, and then there'll be a little blue drop down. You can say using a namespace, and that'll automatically populate it up here so you don't have to remember which namespaces need to be included. Okay, so our plan structure filter, that is going to be our view model. And now we need to instantiate our view, which I will just call UI, and I'll say new UI. Oops. Okay, and I'll have to import a namespace here, because by default this will be the vms.tps namespace, and you can't change this. That is required for this execute method to call. So look what we did here. That was a XAML object, that UI up here, you can see it. That's a XAML object, and it's behaving like a C# object. And that's what I wanted to point out here, is that XAML is, like I said, a way to represent .NET objects using an XML-like syntax. So this really is a C# class, if you will, that we've made typing it out in XAML, and this will still have properties of a user control, and that's how that works. Okay, so every user control has a property called data context, and the data context is what you use to set your view model. And the view model, if you can remember, is the backing class for a view. So it's going to contain all of the data that could be changing, or any specific user interface properties for that view that will all be held inside one class, and that class is, we call those a view model. So in this case, our view model is our plan structure filter, and that will drive the view, and as data changes, the view should update. Alright, now we have our UI, we've injected our data context, or our view model. So now what we need to do is shoot our UI into the window. So we were given the window up here, and the window has a property called content, and we just need to set that to our UI window, our user control. And then we can do some plumbing here. We can say size to content right here, and there's an enum for that, width and height, and that will suck the user interface, that'll suck the window down to the size of the user control in case the user control doesn't fill the whole screen. And then you can do something else, like you can set the resize mode to no resize, something like that. So that won't allow your users to resize the window. So this is all these 6 lines of code right here, and really these last 2 are completely optional. This is how you do the setup for a model view model. You're going to instantiate a view model, make a new view, and inject the view model into the data context property of the view. Then the last step is to inject that view right into the window, and then if you want, you can resize the window to that user control, and then also set some properties on the resizing ability.